It was 11:47 a.m. on a quiet Wednesday in a rustic roadside diner off Route 19. Red vinyl booths, faded Coca-Cola posters, and the smell of frying bacon. The kind of place where regulars sat in silence, and the coffee kept pouring whether you asked for it or not. He stood at the host stand, cap in hand, with a black Labrador by his side. She sighed, loudly. "We don't allow dogs," the waitress said, not even looking up from her tablet. "Health code. You'll have to eat outside." The old man shifted his weight slightly, as if choosing whether to speak. He leaned on a wooden cane, worn smooth at the grip. The Labrador sat calmly, wearing a vest that read "Service Animal, Do Not Pet." But the waitress didn't care to notice. He cleared his throat, soft but sure. "Ma'am, she's a service." "I don't care what she is," she cut in, still not meeting his eyes. "We've had people like you try that before, unless you have, like, proof or something." From booth 4, a mother pulled her toddler closer. Two teens looked up from their milkshakes. A cook behind the counter paused, spatula mid-air. Still, no one spoke. The old man gently reached into the front pocket of his vest and pulled out a laminated card. He offered it wordlessly. The waitress looked at it, rolled her eyes, and walked away. He stood there still holding the card. The dog pressed gently against his leg. After a moment, she shouted across the dining room, "Fine, booth near the back. Just keep the mutt out of the aisle." The silence returned, thick. It hung heavier than the scent of burnt toast. He gave a quiet nod, more to himself than anyone else, and shuffled slowly toward the corner table. His dog followed in lockstep, eyes scanning the floor like it was sacred. The old man sat down, rested his cane against the wall, and stared out the window. He didn't order anything. His name was Thomas Greeley, 81 years old, widower, retired Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army, served 3 tours in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf. He didn't talk about it much, not unless you asked the right way. But if you looked closely, his story lived in the way he moved, carefully, deliberately, as if carrying invisible weight. There was a time when generals knew his name, when he stood shoulder to shoulder with men who never made it home. A Bronze Star for pulling 2 injured soldiers out of a burning transport under sniper fire. A Purple Heart from the shrapnel still buried in his thigh. And the Army Commendation Medal presented by a colonel who shook his hand twice and called him the reason some of us came back. He never mentioned the medals unless someone else brought them up. He kept them in a shoebox beneath his bed, next to a folded flag and an old photo of his wife, Margaret. They met in 1966, before his second deployment. She wrote him letters every week, never missing one, even when she was in labor with their only son, Michael. Michael grew up hearing bedtime stories that always ended with, "But let's be thankful we're safe." He enlisted, just like his father. Thomas didn't want him to, but he understood. Some things run in the blood. Michael died in Afghanistan 12 years ago, an IED. He was 31. Margaret passed away a year later. They said it was her heart. Thomas always said it was something deeper, something the doctors couldn't scan for. Now, every Wednesday, he visited her grave after his morning VA appointment. He brought her yellow daisies, sat on the cold bench beside her, told her how the week had gone, and read her a page from the book they'd started together but never finished. Today was one of those Wednesdays. The dog at his side, Libby, had been trained to sense when Thomas's hands trembled or when the memories came back in waves too strong to bear. She was more than a dog. She was a lifeline, the one soul who'd seen him in his weakest moments and stayed steady. Once, Thomas had been saluted in full dress by an entire unit as he walked onto a base in Texas. Now he was being dismissed by a waitress who didn't bother to read the vest his companion wore. The corner booth smelled faintly of bleach and bacon grease. Thomas sat stiffly, hands folded on the cracked Formica table. Libby tucked herself beneath him, her head resting near his boot. She always did that, small and out of the way, but always connected. The waitress returned holding a menu like it was contaminated. "I hope you're not planning to let that dog on the seat," she snapped. Thomas raised his eyes slowly. "She's trained to stay beneath me. She won't bother anyone," the waitress scoffed. "Right." She dropped the menu hard enough for the cutlery to rattle, then turned on her heel without asking for his order. Her sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as she vanished behind the swinging kitchen doors. Thomas let out a soft breath through his nose. His left hand trembled slightly, so he reached for his coat pocket and found the smooth edge of a coin, a challenge coin from his last deployment. He carried it on days like this. not as a weapon. As a reminder, he glanced up. A couple across from him whispered behind coffee cups. A teenage busboy near the drink station looked uncomfortable but kept wiping a tray. No one said anything. Thomas didn't want a scene. He just wanted eggs, maybe toast, and a place to rest before driving to the cemetery. But 5 minutes passed, then 10. No water, no order taken. No one approached. The other servers seemed to orbit his table without touching it, like he was some kind of risk, like he'd brought trouble in with him. Libby nudged his shin gently, sensing his heartbeat rising. He reached down and gave her ear the smallest rub. Behind the counter, the waitress reappeared, laughing, with another server now loud enough to be heard. "I swear," she said, rolling her eyes again, "these old guys think slapping a patch on a dog makes them special. It's so pathetic." Thomas heard it, every word. His jaw clenched for the first time, not in anger, in restraint. He turned his gaze toward the window again, watching an old red pickup roll by in the lot. There was a time, not long ago, when uniformed men held the door open for him at diners like this, when strangers picked up his tab without saying a word, when people noticed. Now, even the waitress wouldn't look him in the eye. His throat tightened, but he swallowed it down. Always the soldier. Quiet. Controlled. He shifted in his seat. His knee screamed beneath the table, old metal shrapnel reminding him of places no civilian had ever seen. Still, he waited. And still, they ignored him. Thomas didn't touch the menu. He sat still, back straight, like a man trained to endure worse. But in his eyes, there it was, that faraway ache that no medication could reach. After 17 minutes, still no one came. No coffee, no order, just whispers and sideways glances like he'd brought something shameful into the room. Libby shifted beneath the table. She sensed it before he moved. His breath slowed, his hands trembled more now, and he didn't try to stop them. Thomas reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photo. Edges creased, colors faded. A black and white shot of 8 young men in uniform, dusty and grinning under a desert sun. He was the one in the center, younger, taller, mouth open mid-laugh. They were brothers once. 6 of them were gone now. He looked at the photo for a long moment. The waitress's laughter floated from the kitchen again, sharp, careless. Thomas exhaled, a long, tired sigh. Then, without a word, he slid the photo back into his jacket, took his cane, and slowly rose to his feet. No one looked at him. He took 3 careful steps, then paused to let the ache in his leg settle. Libby stood, silent and alert, brushing against him gently. Together they turned for the door. Still, no one stopped them. The bell above the exit jingled softly as they stepped out into the sunlight. Just as the door swung shut behind Thomas, someone finally moved. Not a server, not the manager, but a young man, mid-30s, seated near the back, tucked in a booth behind the condiment station. His name was Chris Hammond, and he hadn't meant to stay long. He was just grabbing coffee between appointments, but he had heard everything. The waitress's tone, the laughter, the name-calling. He'd seen the veteran's shoulders fall as he walked out, seen the moment that quiet dignity gave way to quiet pain. Chris stood slowly, pulled out his phone, and dialed. It rang once. "Yeah, hey, it's me," he said, glancing toward the kitchen. "Listen, I need you to come down to Marlowe's Diner, right now. You're gonna want to see this for yourself." The voice on the other end asked something. Chris nodded. "You remember that foundation you launched? The one that sponsors service dogs for vets?" A pause. He looked out the window, at the old man walking stiffly toward a beat-up Ford with the dog still beside him. "Yeah, him," Chris said quietly. "They just disrespected the wrong guy." He ended the call, didn't yell, didn't confront. He just sat back down, calm, but resolute. Outside, Thomas opened his truck door. Libby jumped in first. The engine coughed to life. He had no idea the wheels of justice were already turning. The diner was in full lunch swing when the black SUV pulled into the lot, sleek, polished, out of place against the dusty pickups and weathered sedans. Inside, the staff barely noticed. The same waitress, still smirking behind the counter, made a face as she dumped coffee grounds into the bin. "I'm not dealing with another one of those dog eyes today," she muttered. That's when the door opened. In walked a man in a navy blue blazer with an embossed gold emblem stitched on the pocket. Robert Gaines, owner of the entire Marlowe's Diner chain and founder of the Liberty Paw Foundation, an organization providing trained service dogs to combat veterans across the country. Behind him came two men in uniform, retired Marine colonels, now part of his advisory board. One of them carried a framed certificate. The other held a leash. But the dog wasn't just any dog. It was a retired service animal wearing a ceremonial Liberty Paw vest, draped in medals and patches. The diner went silent. Chairs squeaked. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Robert scanned the room slowly. His voice when he spoke was calm, but firm enough to stop hearts. "Which one of you mocked the veteran with the service dog?" The waitress froze, her face drained of color. I didn't know he was—" "You didn't ask," he interrupted. He looked to the young man in the corner, Chris, who gave a small nod. That was all he needed. Robert stepped forward and motioned to the manager behind the kitchen window. "This location is closed, effective immediately. Get your staff out." You're shutting us down," the manager stammered. Robert didn't raise his voice. "Respect is not optional in this company. We serve pancakes and people with dignity." A murmur rose in the room. Diners stood, some clapping lightly, others just stunned. The waitress backed away, blinking, then turned and disappeared into the back. But Robert wasn't done. He stepped outside with the certificate and the service dog and approached the red pickup truck where Thomas was just starting to drive away. Chris had already followed him out, waving him down. "Sir," Chris called gently, "would you mind stopping for just a minute?" Thomas hesitated, but he rolled down the window. Libby sat upright in the passenger seat, alert but calm. Then Robert approached. "Mr. Langley?" he asked. Thomas looked wary. "Yes, I'm Robert Gaines. I own this place, and I owe you the deepest apology." Thomas said nothing at first. Then Robert held up the framed certificate. "This is a lifetime honor pass. It gives you and Libby free meals at any Marlowe's location across the country, for life." Thomas's brows lifted. "But more importantly," Robert added, stepping closer, "on behalf of every veteran who's been overlooked, dismissed, or mocked, you deserve better today. You deserve better every day." He saluted, a full, firm military salute. The two men behind him followed. Chris did too. And slowly, quietly, other diners came outside, watching. A young mother stepped out with her toddler. An older man wiped his eyes. Someone clapped. It grew louder. Thomas's mouth moved, but no words came. Finally, he opened the door and stepped out slowly. Libby followed. He didn't salute back. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the photo of his unit again, held it in the sunlight. "They were better men than me," he said softly. This would have meant something to them." Robert nodded. "Then we honor them too." Someone from the crowd approached with a bouquet left on a table inside and handed it to Thomas. "For your wife," the woman whispered. "You said she passed, right?" Thomas blinked fast. "Yes, thank you." Tears welled, but he stood tall. For a moment, the parking lot of a simple roadside diner felt like sacred ground, a place of reckoning, of remembering, of honor, restored. Thomas didn't linger in the applause. He gently rested the bouquet in the passenger seat beside Libby, who sat perfectly still, watching every move. Her training never failed, but this moment felt different. Even she seemed to sense the shift. Robert Gaines extended his hand once more. "If there's ever a time you're treated like less than the hero you are, you call me directly. My number's on the back of that certificate." Thomas nodded, firm and quiet. "Thank you, sir, but I didn't come here for anything free." "I know," Robert replied, his voice softer now. "That's what makes you deserving." As the small crowd slowly dispersed, murmurs of apology and admiration followed Thomas like ripples behind a boat. A few people tried to say more, to ask him questions, to shake his hand, but he simply gave a polite smile and tapped the brim of his faded cap. Then he looked back toward the diner one last time. Through the window, the waitress stood with her apron off, arms folded tightly. Her eyes weren't defiant anymore. They were distant, haunted maybe. She met his gaze, and for a second something passed between them. Not anger, not revenge, just recognition. She turned away, her shoulders sagging. Thomas stepped into his truck and closed the door. The engine started. The bouquet rustled softly in the seat. He looked at it, then at Libby, then out toward the open road ahead. "Let's go home," he murmured. Libby gave a soft bark, ready. As they pulled out of the lot, he didn't check the rearview mirror. Some battles, he knew, weren't won with noise. They were won with silence, with grace, with walking away. Head high, heart whole, and that's exactly what he did. There are moments in life when honor doesn't shout. It simply stands, takes the blow, and walks away with dignity intact. Thomas Langley didn't fight back. He didn't argue, accuse, or demand respect. He just lived in a way that made it impossible not to give it. That's the quiet power of true character, because sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is endure cruelty with grace and let the world correct itself around them. Let this be a reminder, you never know who you're speaking to. The man with the limp and the tired eyes might have once carried men through fire. The woman with the service dog might have stood between your freedom and someone else's bullet. Respect isn't earned through flashy titles or loud demands. Sometimes it's worn quietly, in scars, in silence, and in service. And it should never, ever be optional. Subscribe if you believe respect should never be optional.